This is Patricia Hazell for Patricia's Potpourri. And today we have a very special episode of Patricia's Potpourri. We're observing a very special birthday. And we have Mr. Puzzles, Kevin Dunn, who is he makes puzzles, and he makes paper puzzles and all kinds of different puzzles, but he'll explain that to you. But today is we're observing a very special birthday. And when I was looking at Malcolm X the other day on television, uh, I realized that his father, but I did before, was a Garveyite. And that was some of the pride in which we have. So I would like to introduce you right now to someone who's a descendant of a Garveyite, and he'll explain it to you. This is Mr. Puzzles, also known as Mr. Kevin Dunn. Or maybe I should have put it the other way. Hey, Mr. Kevin Dunn.
Yeah, how you doing, Patricia?
Thank you for very much for being on Patricia's Potpourri. And this is your you've been there on Patricia's Potpourri before. And
yeah,
so your work is so informative. And I wish people would get more familiar with what you are doing. Okay. So, Mr. Kevin Dunn, I'm just so proud of what you're doing. There's a special birthday that's coming up, and and could you please tell the audience whose birthday?
yes. This month, August 17th, is the birthday of the Honorable Marcus Mosiah Garvey, who was born in 87, and he would have been what about 100 and what 17, 20, maybe 130 30 plus years. I think about 134 if he had lived. I believe I did my math right. Yes. So actually, so yes, we do have a Marcus Garvey's birthday coming up on the 17th of this month. And so, as you were saying in your introduction, part of what I do is to celebrate, commemorate our history through historical cultural puzzle books, and most recently a new jigsaw puzzle that actually was created in honor of Marcus Garvey. So when you reached out to me earlier today about appearing on your show, on your program, it's funny. I was actually in the process of working on a new newsletter, honoring Marcus Garvey because, like most folks, I myself didn't know much about Garvey. I heard things over the years, little bits and pieces of information. And it wasn't until I started working on the jigsaw puzzle, a few years ago, that I decided to do a little bit more, research about Marcus Garvey, his life and his work. So a little bit of that I will put in the newsletter, and some of that I guess we'll talk about now.
Okay. Well, let's start from the bottom. Who is Marcus Garvey?
You putting me on the spot now, like yeah, because really, like one of the things I say in my newsletter, I say sometimes we do folks an injustice when we try to summarize their life in a few sentences or with just catchy slogans and phrases. I mean, Marcus Garvey, like most of us, he was a complex individual. Based upon my readings of him, I mean, he was a visionary, most definitely. He was an organizer. He was a leader. He was a business person. He was definitely a Pan Africanist and a Black nationalist. I mean, so there's a lot of things we could say about Marcus Garvey. But most importantly, I think it was his commitment and dedication to the liberation of Black people or people of African descent all over the world. I think that's the thing that really stands out. and that is noteworthy about him. That for the duration and a good portion of his life, that's what he committed himself to doing. Him, along with the people that worked with him and his wife, and even to a large degree his children, were essentially about the liberation of Black people, African people here in the states and all over the world. And so a lot of his work revolved around that.
Excuse me, Kevin. Could you please give us a time period of Marcus Garvey's life? Any little period so people can zoom into that time?
Okay, yes. Well, again, I'm not an expert, quote, on Marcus Garvey, but I have been, taking upon myself to just to go a little bit deeper to find out, as much as I can about his life, and so I know, like, say, for example, between the years of, say, 1910 and 1912, he did a lot of traveling in Central America. First of all, he was born in Jamaica in, believe it was St. Anne's Bay, Jamaica in 1877 on August the 17th. In his early life, when he was a teenager, he studied the printing trade. He loved to read. And from what I understand, his father had, like, an extensive library in their home. And so he read a lot, and he was a self-taught individual. And, he began to learn the printing trade while still a youngster in Jamaica. Somewhere, around that time, maybe when he was 15, 16, 17 years old, he left Jamaica and he began traveling, around the Caribbean, rather, to Central and South America, visiting Panama, Costa Rica, and a number of other Central American countries. After witnessing the observing up close, the conditions of Black people in these various countries, and also in London, where he also spent time, he came to the conclusion that we needed help. There was a lot that we didn't have. Our conditions, like, globally, left a lot to be questioned. So he posed the question to himself: where's the Black man's government? Where's his king? Where's his men and women of big affairs? And so he said to himself that, because he didn't see these things during his travels, he wanted to create it. He said, well, that would be his mission. So when he returned to Jamaica, him, I believe his first wife, co-founded an organization called the Universal Negro Improvement Association, which they co-founded together in Jamaica. Fast forward a few years, I believe, he came to the United States between 1916 and 1917, having read the autobiography of Booker T. Washington, up from slavery, which inspired him. So with the idea of wanting to meet Booker T. Washington, that's one of the reasons why he left Jamaica and came to the United States. When he came here, one of the first places that he settled in was Harlem, New York, and where he established the first UNIA chapter around 1917. And then from there on, that's when he began to build and develop the Universal Negro Improvement Association, along with other folks. And, that's when it gradually began to take off.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I told I've always been interested in Marcus Garvey. I remember one time by Lincoln Center, they had a Garvey festival years ago, which I attended. And when I looked at the movie Malcolm X, which I'd said before, but it talked about Marcus Garvey and how his father, the father of Malcolm X, was a Garveyite. And I know somebody in your family was a Garveyite. And could you tell us a little bit about that, Kevin?
Sure, sure. As I mentioned to you, earlier, I didn't find out until maybe, 6, 7, 8 years ago that my grandmother had been a Garveyite. My mother, who was approaching her 90th birthday, we decided, my nephew and, some of the other members of the family decided to do like a tribute celebration to my mother, since she was nearing her 90th birthday. And so they decided to do a session where they would record. And during the recording, we just got to talking about a lot of things. First of all, the fact that she had been born in Cuba, and she spent time in Cuba, as a young girl growing up, with my grandparents. Who, just as a side note, my grandfather was a tailor, and so what they did, they traveled, throughout the Caribbean, where he plied his trade as a tailor, following a lot of migrant workers. So for some years, they spent time, like around 1920 or so, they were living in Cuba, where I think my grandparents, they were working in the sugarcane fields, and that's where my mother was born. But as she was relating, different stories about her early childhood, which we never knew, because as a youngster, my mother was very private. But as she got older, she began to open up, and then so as we were talking, she was sharing with us about how her mother used to drag, as a little girl, her mother used to drag her on Sundays to meetings, the Marcus Garvey meetings. And so she was talking about how, her mother would put on the white uniform and then take it to the meeting, and where she got a chance to see Marcus Garvey up close. I'm not sure, we're not sure, the family that is, whether she actually met him or not. But the way she described him as a short, pudgy little man, I mean, she described him to a T as only somebody who had seen him up close probably could, But she talked about, her mother being a nurse in the Black Cross nurses, which was part of Garvey's organization, which again, the family, we never really knew. And so again, hearing that and learning that story, since then, anytime I have an opportunity to speak to folks, I encourage them to take time to speak to the elders in their family, because you just never know what you might find out, And so we were fortunate that before she passed, because she passed a few years later, just a couple months before she turned 97. But at least we had the opportunity to learn some of the family history and to find out about this connection, with our grandparents, with the Garvey movement and with the Garvey organization, which is huge, which really, helps to shed light on maybe why I, somehow is in my genes to do, the kind of work that I've been called to do. I mean, that's just part of I guess the family legacy, But it was an amazing story and amazing revelation that we found out.
Thank you.
Welcome.
My director told me to just make sure that we talk about the flag.
Um, for one thing, I'm thinking that maybe at some point you want to invite Marcus Garvey's son on to, I think, Dr. Julius Garvey onto your program, because he's still alive. I had an opportunity to watch a video interview he did a few months ago with Louise Dente, who's based out in Queens. She's the director, the executive producer and director of a show called Cultural Caravan TV. So, when, later, I could give you the information and you could reach out to her, and maybe she could put you in touch with Dr. Garvey, who would be an excellent resource for you to talk to about his father, as well about his mother, because we hear a lot about Marcus Garvey, but we really hear very little about Amos Jocks Garvey, who was his wife, and also, compiled his speeches and writings into the book, The Philosophy and Opinions of Marcus Garvey. I mean, so she was an amazing woman in her own right. I mean, so in terms of the flag, yeah, the red, black, and green flag of liberation, those were the colors of the UNI flag that was established during the lifetime of Marcus Garvey, and that's still in use today. What they call or refer to as an African flag of liberation, or the liberation flag, which is red, the colors which is red, black, and green, and which is used. If you look at some of the flags of several African nations, you will see that they have the same colors in their flag as well. I believe Ghana is one of those countries, and a few others, who again were inspired by the works and philosophy of Marcus Garvey.
If we here in New York have an African American Day parade, and
Yes.
yes, and I hope that everyone will always remember it's the third Sunday in September. So,
That's
and
right.
that's, yeah. And we usually have our flags out during that day.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah. Um, and it's okay. You are going to tell the director told asked me to say a comment
The Africa campaign.
about the Back to Africa movement. Do you know? Is there anything about the Back to Africa
Well,
movement?
you know, here's the thing. Like, you know, like I said, I'm working on another newsletter. I just sent out a newsletter for, the series I do. My brand is Puzzles for Us, and the puzzle books and the new jigsaw puzzle I just put out is released under the Puzzles for Us brand. So at least once or twice a month, sometimes more. I send out a monthly a newsletter, about different topics and subjects. And so one of the things I was writing about recently was Marcus Garvey. One as a way of just commemorating him, and also to let folks know that my new Marcus Garvey historical jigsaw puzzle is also now available. So in terms of Back to Africa, so one of the things I kind of touch on briefly in the newsletter is how sometimes we think of Marcus Garvey, we think about this whole idea of how he wanted to take Black folks back to Africa, which was part of his program and part of his vision. He wanted to mobilize, a cadre or a portion of some Black folks to go back to Africa, and he did, initiate a dialogue with the Liberia in Africa, with officials in Liberia, where there were discussions about, the possibility of some blacks from the U.S. and other parts of the world to go back to Africa. That fell through because for a host of different reasons, and he also was in trade negotiations where he was looking to do trade and commerce with several African nations, specifically Liberia. But again, for a number of different reasons, that fell through. Because here's the thing: a lot of the colonial governments, the European colonial governments that had colonized, many African countries, they were tremendously, they were terribly afraid of Garvey and the movement he had initiated, as well as the government here in the U.S. And so, among many of the things that they did, they forbade, they banned his newspaper, the Negro World, from countries in Africa. They made it illegal for you to have a copy of that in their possession. So there were a lot of efforts being made by various European governments, as well as the U.S. government, to not only discredit Garvey, but to undermine his efforts to initiate meaningful exchange, meaningful dialogue, and a meaningful relationship with countries on the African continent. But yes, part of Garvey's mission and vision was to first of all awaken Black people, African people, to the idea that we are a free people, independent people, and that we have a right to have our own government, our own nation, our own country, and our own self rule, and to be able to define ourselves. So in line with that, he was, working on efforts and the idea of resettling a segment of Black folks back in African country, specifically Liberia.
Well, you know, Kevin, that's so powerful. And it's something that you all the years have passed, and you see the same types of problems, the
Yes,
separations, um, being told things to keep you divided. And we know
yes,
about divide and conquer, you know. And I see what Marcus Garvey has tried to bring everyone together. And I um, had seen the U.S. government did a lot of uh, propaganda or damage. This is me speaking to discourage and even infiltrate the organization. But that's when everybody needs to do a little research and they can read about
Exactly.
who infiltrated the Garvey movement. And Kevin, I appreciate so many things you do, but before near countdown time, and I'm gonna kidnap you another time for a show.
Right.
But could you please tell them about all the informative books and puzzles that you have created?
Right.
Okay, so people can be informed about their heritage.
Right. So yes, again, what I've done, I created a series called Puzzles for Us, and through cultural historical puzzle books, crosswords, word search, even to some degree Sudoku puzzles. I'm telling our story. Filling in the missing pieces of history. Most recently, I created a new jigsaw puzzle. It's a 100-piece historical jigsaw puzzle, and is really a great way for folks to commemorate his rich, enduring legacy. Along with that, I have a coloring book called All About Me, which profiles folks, like Carmen Spoon, Shirley Chisholm, Bob Marley, who else? It's folks like Muhammad Ali, um, Mae Jemison, that the first African American female astronaut to go into space, and a host of other folks, Dr. John Henry Clark, Regent Adelaide Sanford, and a lot of folks who normally don't get portrayed or represented in some of the material that's out there now. And so, yeah, so there's a whole series. Folks can go to my website at puzzlesforus.com. That's puzzlesforus.com, for more information. There's another book, Piecing It Together, which was written with young adults, teenagers, and young adults in mind, which again, is a snapshot of the history. So stories about the African burial ground, Black Wall Street, the Statue of Liberty, and a bunch of other stuff is in there. So the idea is to make learning our history fun and entertaining, for not just the youngsters, but the adults as well.
You know, I saw your books as a springboard because you came to an affair that we had, and where people went and started doing more research about some of the people presented in your coloring books. You have coloring books. That's the thing. Your books span all ages, like coloring books for early
Yeah.
grade to graduate students in a certain place. So your material run the gamut if you want to learn about history.
Exactly. Yes, from age 3 to 103. I mean,
I
so
love
and that's the idea because we're never too young or too old to learn. I'm a lifelong learner. You asked me about Garvey. Like I said, it's only in recent years I begin to really delve deeper into his history, and I just have a natural curiosity because we have such a rich, amazing history and such a rich, amazing story, and we find out new stuff every day about ourselves. I mean, recently I learned about that concert they had in Central Park in Marcus Garvey Park. I believe it was 1969, called the Summer of Soul. And someone had it on the shelf somewhere, sitting on the shelf for the past 40, 50 years. But when you watch it, you see the beauty, you see the colorfulness, you see the richness of our culture, in full expression. So that's the kind of stuff that I aspire to do with the Puzzles for Us series, to make it readily available to folks, in a very reader-friendly, user-friendly way, and then make it accessible, where youngsters as well as adults see stories, read stories, and see images of people and things that look like them and reflect the communities they come from. So, and that's why I appreciate what you're doing with your program by providing a platform where folks like myself can come on and share some of the work and talk about some of the things that we're doing. So I thank
Thank
you
you.
as well.
I thank you. And my Miss Ruth Butler, who was
Yes.
one of my neighbors and a dear friend. I don't want to talk too much about her because she went on to glory.
Mm.
But I
Wow.
remember her buying a set of your books to take to the school in which her son uh, is a part of,
But
and
I remember.
so important. It's so important uh, that people, not only people of African heritage, but all kinds of people learn about this, because that's inclusion. That's what we should. Everybody should be learning everyone else's history. It should be uniform. You shouldn't be excluded from history because you are a certain kind of people.
Exactly. And especially during it, because here it is, we in 2021, and we see all the pushback. I was talking to a friend of mine recently, and she was, talking about, this critical race theory and cancel culture and all this other stuff they're trying to come up with as a way of trying to erase us from history. So you're so right, Patricia. And again, so I appreciate the opportunity just to share some of these insights and information.
And Kevin, I love you even though you didn't call me by Patricia, my mother given name. And I still love you anyway. Thank you so much, Kevin. Okay, I hope we're going to make sure that everyone gets the contact information for you so that they can have their families or be informed themselves. I thank you once again, and I hope that I'm able to get you one more time for the show in the future. Would you become and be a guest on Patricia's Potpourri again?
Well, yeah, I'd be more than delighted to. It's
Oh,
always a pleasure.
okay, tell them your name again and what you do.
Yeah, it's Kevin Dunn. Folks know me as Mr. Puzzle or the Puzzle Guy, and I'm the creator and founder of Puzzles for Us, which is what I refer to as cultural entertainment. It tells our story and history through fun, educational puzzle books, crossword, word search, Sudoku, jigsaw puzzles, online custom puzzles.
Thank you, Mr. Kevin Dunn. And as I said, Patricia's Potpourri may be seen anytime you want on YouTube, and we are on the various channels. I want to thank you so much for watching. If you any comments, please send them in, and thank you so much. Goodbye.